All right, let's talk about stupidity and critical thinking. I have written a book called Willful, Ignorance, and Stupid Political Decisions, and it's just come out in its second edition. Obviously, it's very blunt talk. You can tell that from the title. And I want to concentrate on stupidity because in light of what's happened with the Charlie Kirk assassination and the rhetoric that has come out as a result, I think we really need to focus on stupidity and its relationship to critical thinking. So let's first define stupidity, and I define it the way that Bertrand Russell, a British philosopher, did. He defines it this way: stupidity is not merely a lack of intellect, it is the refusal to think critically. So we all make stupid decisions. It doesn't matter. This isn't a left or right kind of issue when we talk about, gee, do you ever make stupid decisions? I certainly have made stupid decisions in my life. But here's the difference in terms of the current climate. Especially Trump and conservatives and the MAGA folks and people on the right, not only are they guilty of making stupid decisions, but instead of being embarrassed by those decisions and wanting to correct it when they're shown to be wrong, they seem to celebrate it. They seem to wallow in it. They seem to want to continue to double down on it. And that is the difference, and that is very, very disturbing. What they oftentimes do is what is called projection. And you probably have heard this term used quite frequently because Trump is guilty of using projection on pretty much a daily basis. So anytime you accuse him of something, he turns around and accuses those who have accused him of the same thing. And that's projection. So let's talk about anecdotes and the examples that anecdotes purport to prove something, when in fact what they are really doing is creating a fallacy which is called hasty generalization, which is defined basically as generalizing from too few or atypical examples. So we have the Charlie Kirk assassination, and Trump has said that it's the result of, and this is his quote, radical left lunatics. And he does that, of course, completely without any kind of supporting evidence. He said that even before we knew any of the details about the shooter. We didn't even have a clear identification at that time as to who shot Charlie Kirk. And we still don't have any details from the actual shooter who has been taken into custody. He refuses to talk. So we really don't know what his motivation is, but all kinds of speculation, especially from the right wing and from Trump, about, oh, this is the result of the left and liberals constantly attacking Trump, as if this is somehow hard evidence. All it is really an anecdote. It's a tragic anecdote, but an anecdote is simply an example. And arguing from a single example is a fallacy, because for every example you can find on one side, in this case, let's say the right is arguing the Charlie Kirk assassination as a result of radical left lunatics, as Trump depicts them, you can find one, or in some cases numerous examples on the other side which prove exactly the opposite, that the evidence really shows that domestic violence that is politically oriented primarily comes from the right and conservatives. There are actually studies that demonstrate that. The Cato Institute has done a thorough examination and has concluded that 63% of the domestic violent attacks and deaths in the United States have been motivated by the right wing, and 10% have come from the left. So we're not saying that the left never commits any kind of violence or death result, but we are saying that it is, especially in the current atmosphere, primarily a right-wing, especially white supremacist and white nationalist kind of phenomenon. Let's also talk, when we're talking about critical thinking and the issue of stupidity, the issue of Trump and his lying, his perpetual lying. Trump was documented to have said 30,573 lies during his 4 years as president in his first term, after he lost the 2020 election, and he did in fact lose that election, and it's called the big lie every time he says he didn't lose the election. If there is a Guinness Book of World Records for the person who has told the greatest number of lies, Trump would probably be the champion. He also uses wildly inaccurate statistics. He just makes stuff up that doesn't even make sense. And the thing that's interesting is that the Republicans, the conservatives, the MAGA folks repeatedly treat his exaggerations, his hyperbole, and his ridiculous statistics as if they're somehow logical and that they actually make sense when they don't make sense. For instance, yesterday, he just made a wild statement that, and this is a quote, there are 300 million deaths from drug overdoses, and it was implicitly within the context that he meant the United States. But even if he didn't mean the United States, the World Health Organization has said that in total, globally, the figure is 600,000 deaths worldwide in the last year from drug overdoses. So it's not even close. We're talking 300 million versus 600,000 globally. And the statistics here in the United States are more like 75,000 deaths that have resulted from drug overdoses in the last year. So his statistics don't even make any sense. And of course, I have quoted in other places, and plenty of people have jumped on the statistic where he said he was going to reduce drug prices by 1,500%, which means that when you go and get your prescription, you go to the pharmacist and they give you the prescription and then they say, and here's a wad of cash, because 1,500% means that you're actually in a negative number. So they actually owe you money rather than you having to pay money. So it makes absolutely no sense. So what is my conclusion from all of this? My conclusion is very simple. Critical thinking has never been more important than now. And the challenge is that Trump, MAGA, and the Republicans every day weaponize stupidity by the way in which they make their claims and the wild exaggerations and oftentimes assertions without any credible evidence. They undermine our democracy and our ability to engage in reasonable discourse. I'm excited to announce the release of the second edition of my book, Willful Ignorance and Stupid Political Decisions. What this book does is it presents a completely different analysis of the 2024 election that you're likely to find from any pundits or podcasters or political junkies. But more importantly, it presents an extensive, comprehensive plan for how we can win in the 2026 election and beyond and reverse what has happened to our country that is on the precipice of losing democracy. So if you're interested, please check the link below.